My name is Aurelia Bermudez Fells, and this is my art project, Blooming Space. This project is about 21.5 by 17.5 inches, and it took approximately 126 hours to make. I started with the border that would go around the frame, and it wound up being around 76 inches or so. It took me about 4 days to crochet the entire thing. I used a sparkle yarn, and it was a sensory nightmare to work with. It was super itchy. It gave me a horrible rope burn for the many hours that I would crochet at a time. I definitely had a struggle. I tried using gloves that just hurt more somehow. It was a very difficult yarn to work with, not because of the yarn itself, but because I have sensory issues and I'm very limited to what yarn I can use when I crochet. To start the moon, I began with a cardboard and tinfoil base. I then covered that in clay to get a nice shape of the moon. I wanted it to have volume but not weight, and this was a perfect alternative than having a solid clay sculpture, seeing as it would allow the moon to have lots of volume but not much weight to it. It still wound up very heavy, but not nearly as heavy as it would have been if it was solid clay. Once it was completely covered, I smoothed out most of the roughness that I could, and then I started on the stars while I let the moon dry a while. I made the stars by flattening some clay with my hands and using a small cookie cutter to get the shape. One lesson I quickly learned was that you cannot carve into wet clay or it becomes a clumpy mess. I had to let it dry for about 30 minutes before carving it, and that left me with very clean lines, and then I just needed a paintbrush to clean up any roughness from it. The moon took about a week to dry, and one of the problems that kept happening was it was cracking everywhere. I only got a picture of a small crack, but eventually there was a massive crack down the center, and I wound up taking some advice off of TikTok and letting it fully dry out. I then spent about 2 hours patching it once it was dry, and it looked like nothing had even happened. My patches worked perfectly. The other issue was it kept curling. It was no longer a flat surface that would stay flush to a canvas board, and I needed a solution for that quick. Unfortunately, there was really nothing I could do other than incorporate the curviness of the moon into the canvas, as there was no way for me to weigh it down without completely shattering the 4 hours of work that I had done on the moon. Finally, the moon was dry and patched. It was time to paint. I started off with this beautiful sky blue, and within that moment I made the decision to keep this a monochrome painting. I didn't want to go overboard with color. I wanted to keep everything within the same tone, so I decided to stick with hues of blue. I used a beauty blender to tap in those deeper shades of cobalt blue around the edges, and then I started off with a beauty blender, but I wound up using my fingers to get a smoother shade of white, and then got in more details with a paintbrush, and finally I was able to get this beautiful metallic color in the crevices before I covered the entire thing in glitter glue, and it became this beautifully iridescent surface. I wound up going a very similar route with the glow that would appear on the base of the canvas. I started off with a black base. I left the space blank where the glue would go to hold the moon, as that has to stay textured. And I added a bit of glitter glue, because you can never have too much glitter, around the glow of the moon to kind of make it look like stardust was escaping from the moon itself. And I used the same shades of blue to get that nice glow. While all that dried, I started crocheting the petals that would surround the centers of the stars. I made 7 of them total, and that took maybe around 3 or 4 hours to crochet every single one of them. Then I needed all the decorative pieces that would go on the canvas, and I got really excited for this piece. I started crocheting these roses. I made a small piece of coral in the corner. I wound up not using that, and I made a vine that would hang off of the moon itself and that some of the stars would bloom off of. I then made 6 more stars and sewed them together to make these plump ones, which would trickle down from the canvas. Again, everything ranges from shades of white to shades of blue, and the vine is a little more teal, but it's still within the same areas of the color wheel, keeping this fairly monochrome. This had to have been the most exciting part. I couldn't wait to start gluing things together. Next, it was time to drill holes in my canvas and in the frame itself. So at this point, I had put the canvas into the frame. It was ready to be drilled into, and I tried doing it by hand. That was not working at all. It was taking forever. My hand was really sore, and I wound up asking a family member to drill the holes for me after marking out exactly where they needed to go on the canvas using a little bit of white paint. After that, I finally got to glue the moon down using some E6000. The E6000 smelled horrible. It was a terrible smell. It only took about 10 minutes to glue the moon down, but I had to leave the AC running and my room door wide open just to get rid of the smell. I would definitely not do it in my room in the future, but I didn't really have another option at the time. Next time I would definitely use E6000 in a much more ventilated space than my bedroom. Despite E6000's infamous ability to hold things with their glue formula, I didn't trust it quite enough to just leave the moon as is, so I used a needle and some metal wire to weave the moon onto the canvas just as some extra support. I wound up poking myself maybe a couple 100 times. I wound up throwing the needle aside because it just was not as helpful as I was hoping it would be. But eventually the weaving was done and I felt like the moon was finally fully secured. Finally, it was time to glue it all down and finish the piece. This piece really took a lot of attention to detail. I absolutely love all the texture that the crochet brings. I love the emphasis that comes from the bright colors around the moon and how it makes the glow really pop. I like how all of the colors are very uniform, minus the little peekaboo of yellow, which contrasts all of the blue and all of the dark background, but are still balanced within the white petals that they have. I feel the proportion of the moon and how large it is compared to the rest of all the little details is a great use of space. It does mean that everything is a little crowded in the corner, but I feel like that fits the movement that I was trying to get of everything going away from the moon, of how it's all crowded and focused from the light of the moon and everything is grown from the moon before drifting off. As for the meaning and symbolism behind this piece, there really isn't any. It's completely aesthetic. I made this because I thought it would look really cool. I thought that it would be some beautiful art piece that could hang on the wall, and I was really excited to make it. If I were to give this piece symbolism, I think I would say it is the idea of light in space giving life, because all life comes from light, and it slowly drifts off into the emptiness of space. Other than that, I wouldn't give it any other meaning. I really just made this because it is beautiful. I really wish I could hang it on the wall. Unfortunately, that's the one thing that I cannot do by myself because I do not know how to find a stud. I love the way the stars hang off. I like how the smaller stars look like flowers that have fallen off of their main vine around the moon. And I love how the moon brings light to everything and is a major contrast to the dark background. Everything about this piece, it makes me feel so proud that I spent the hours to make this, and I'm really hoping that one day it gets to hang on a wall.